A stranger beneath the stars. The storm rolled across the hills like an unruly beast, its roar shaking the windows of Dr. Elias Carter's secluded cabin. Rain pounded against the glass, a relentless drumbeat that matched the turmoil in his chest. He had sought solitude in this remote corner of Earth after the loss of his wife, a brilliant biochemist taken too soon. The grief had buried him, stealing the will to heal others, leaving his medical equipment to gather dust in the attic. Lightning lit the forest outside, casting eerie shadows across the overgrown yard. Elias sipped his coffee absent-mindedly, staring into the darkness. Then something moved, just at the edge of the tree line, a shadow too solid, too deliberate to be the swaying of branches. His pulse quickened as he set the cup down and moved closer to the window. Another flash of lightning confirmed it. A figure slumped against a tree. Grabbing his raincoat and a flashlight, Elias stepped into the storm, the chill of the rain biting through his resolve. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the figure more clearly. It was a woman, or so it seemed, her body limp and her skin shimmering faintly, like moonlight reflected on water. Her clothes were unlike anything Elias had seen, a seamless fabric that pulsed faintly, almost as if alive. "Mom, can you hear me?" Elias crouched beside her, his medical instincts kicking in. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing an iridescent glow that seemed to shift and dance like a kaleidoscope. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "You're injured," Elias said, scanning her for visible wounds. Her skin was translucent, almost crystalline in places, with deep gashes that shimmered unnaturally. Whatever she wasn't human. But the blood pooling beneath her was red. Her voice, faint but clear, cut through the storm. "Help, please." Elias hesitated, the weight of impossibility bearing down on him. Yet, in that moment, she wasn't an alien or a mystery. She was a life in danger. Carefully, he scooped her up, surprised by how light she was, as if gravity barely clung to her form. Her body radiated heat, far above any human fever. Inside the cabin, he laid her on the couch, his hands moving instinctively. The gashes were deep, and her strange flesh resisted the antiseptic he applied. "What are you?" he muttered under his breath, not expecting an answer. Her eyes opened again, locking onto his. Crash. Ship damage. Pursued. Pursued by what? Elias asked, his voice sharper than he intended. The woman grimaced, struggling to speak, but her body convulsed in pain. "You need to stabilize," she managed, pointing weakly to a device on her belt. Elias retrieved it, marveling at its sleek, organic design. When he placed it in her hand, it lit up, emitting a soft hum. Her breathing steadied, but her skin remained pallid, her wounds refusing to close. "Not enough," she whispered. "Compatible source." Elias frowned. Source for what? Her gaze locked onto his, and he felt a strange pull, as if she were looking through him. "Your blood. It may work." He stared at her, incredulous. "You want a transfusion? That's insane. We're not even the same species." "It's the only chance," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Please." Elias hesitated, every rational part of his mind screaming against the idea. Yet, as he looked at her, this being so alien yet so vulnerable, he couldn't turn away. If she had risked everything to come here, the least he could do was try. Grabbing his old transfusion kit, Elias worked quickly, sterilizing the equipment and drawing blood from his arm. His hands trembled as he inserted the needle into her vein, watching his blood flow into her. The effect was immediate and startling. Her wounds began to shimmer, the crystalline structures knitting themselves together, glowing faintly as they healed. Her breathing steadied, and her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a warmth that seemed almost human. "You saved me," she said softly. Elias slumped back into the chair, exhaustion and disbelief washing over him. "Don't thank me yet. I don't even know if this will hold." She smiled faintly, her expression carrying a strange serenity. "It will. You've done more than you know." Outside, the storm began to subside, the thunder rolling into the distance. But inside the cabin, Elias's world had irrevocably changed. Whoever, or whatever, this woman was, she had brought with her more questions than answers. And something told him that his life would never be the same again. Echoes of the unknown. The morning broke with an unsettling stillness, as if the storm had swept away more than just the night. Elias Carter sat at the kitchen table, nursing a fresh cup of coffee and casting wary glances toward the living room. She was still there, the alien woman. Her shimmering skin caught the morning light, fractals of color dancing across her form as she rested. The sight stirred a mixture of awe and apprehension in him. He had no idea what to do next. Call someone. The military. NASA. No. Something told him that whatever had pursued her to Earth would make that a deadly mistake. The sound of shifting fabric pulled his attention. She was awake, sitting upright, the blanket wrapped around her like a makeshift robe. Her gaze wandered the room, lingering on the small details, photographs, books, the antique clock on the mantel, as if she were cataloging his entire life in mere seconds. "Good morning," Elias ventured, his voice cautious. She turned her head to him, her kaleidoscopic eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "Your star," she said softly, nodding toward the sunlight filtering through the window. "It is vibrant, warm, unlike my own." Elias set his mug down, choosing his words carefully. "You're not from around here. That's obvious. But I don't even know your name." She hesitated, as if weighing the implications of sharing such a thing. Finally, she spoke. "I am Elara." The name felt strange on his tongue when he repeated it. "Elara. I'm Elias." She tilted her head, studying him. "You are different from the others of your kind. Your actions, they are not guided by self-preservation." Elias leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Most people would call that recklessness, maybe stupidity. Or courage," she said simply, her lips curving into a faint smile. The compliment landed awkwardly, and Elias cleared his throat, shifting the conversation. "You said you were pursued. By what?" Her expression darkened, and the air seemed to grow heavier. "The Syndicate," she said, her voice sharp with disdain. "They are scavengers, conquerors. My people fled their grasp, but they followed." Elias felt a chill run through him. "And you? You're some kind of scout, refugee." "I was an envoy," Elara said, her tone tinged with regret. "Sent to find a place where we could rebuild. My vessel was damaged in the escape, and I landed here. They followed the trail." Elias's mind raced, connecting the dots. "So they're coming here." She nodded gravely. "They are relentless. They will not stop until they find me. Or worse, your planet becomes collateral in their war." The weight of her words pressed down on Elias. He looked at her, this alien envoy who had stumbled into his quiet, broken life, and felt a strange, unexpected resolve harden in his chest. "Then we need to figure out a way to stop them." Elara's iridescent eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face. "You would fight them? For me?" "For all of us," Elias said, his voice steadier than he felt. "If they're a threat to Earth, I can't just sit here and do nothing." Elara studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his worth. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Then I will teach you." Elias blinked. "Teach me what?" "How to fight them," she said, rising to her feet with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. "Your courage is remarkable, but courage alone will not be enough." Her words carried a weight of certainty that left no room for argument. Elias found himself nodding, though a part of him couldn't believe what he was agreeing to. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. A small-town doctor about to prepare for a war against alien conquerors. The lessons began almost immediately. Elara retrieved a small crystalline device from her belongings, activating it with a soft hum. The air around them shimmered as holographic projections filled the room. Schematics of ships, weapons, and syndicate soldiers. They will come heavily armed, Alara explained, pointing to one of the projections. Their technology is advanced, but not invincible. Your ingenuity may prove to be their greatest weakness. Elias frowned, absorbing the overwhelming information. And what about you? Can you fight? Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping. My strength is limited. The crash depleted my energy reserves, and even with your blood, full recovery will take time. I can guide you, but I cannot lead the battle. The responsibility settled heavily on Elias's shoulders, but he didn't back away. Then I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what I need to do. Hours passed as Alara guided him through strategies, explaining the syndicate's tactics and weaknesses. The more he learned, the more he realized how unprepared he truly was. Yet, amidst the doubts, a flicker of determination remained. He had already saved one life. Now, it seemed, he would have to save many more. As the day faded into night, Elias stood outside the cabin, staring at the stars. Somewhere out there, the syndicate was coming. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel powerless. Alara's arrival had given him a purpose, a reason to fight. Not just for her, but for the world he had almost given up on. Behind him, Alara stepped onto the porch, her shimmering presence a quiet comfort. Elias, she said softly. He turned, meeting her gaze. Yeah. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying an unspoken depth of gratitude. For trusting me. For choosing to stand. Elias nodded, a small grim smile on his face. Let's just hope I don't regret it. The stars above seemed brighter that night, as if bearing witness to the quiet resolve of a man who had found his purpose in the most unexpected of places. The battle ahead would be unlike anything he had ever faced, but he wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, he believed that maybe, just maybe, humanity could prevail. The hunter's signal. The stillness of the night was deceiving, wrapping Elias and Alara in a false sense of peace. Beyond the horizon, unseen and relentless, danger loomed. Elias felt it in his bones as he stared at the holographic projections Alara had conjured earlier, their faint glow illuminating the cabin's living room. Every image she shared was a warning, a glimpse into the cold efficiency of the syndicate. They'll arrive soon, Alara said, her voice low. She stood by the window, her kaleidoscopic eyes scanning the dark forest. Their scouts will search first. They rarely attack without intelligence. Elias rubbed his temples, the weight of it all threatening to crush him. And how do we stop them from finding you? Or this place? Alara turned, her movements fluid yet deliberate. By becoming the distraction they do not expect. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Elias's instincts screamed at him to reject the notion. He was no soldier. He had spent his life stitching wounds, not inflicting them. And yet there was no one else. No cavalry. No reinforcements. Just a grieving doctor and an otherworldly envoy fighting against time and overwhelming odds. A sudden, sharp beeping noise shattered the fragile quiet. Alara tensed, her iridescent skin dimming as if to blend into the shadows. She retrieved a small, orb-like device from her belt, its surface flickering with alien symbols. What is it? Elias asked, stepping closer. Their signal, Alara said grimly. They're broadcasting a locator pulse. It's faint now, but it will strengthen. When it does, they'll triangulate my position. Elias's chest tightened. How much time do we have? Hours, if we're fortunate. Minutes, if we're not. She placed the orb on the table, her fingers gliding over its surface. The device emitted a soft hum before projecting a three-dimensional map of the surrounding area. Red blips appeared, scattered but moving with calculated precision. They're already here, she said, pointing to the closest marker. A scout. Small, but deadly. Elias swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. What are our options? Alara's eyes glinted with resolve. Neutralize the scout before it relays my location. If it succeeds, the Syndicate's forces will converge here. He shook his head, pacing the room. Neutralize? You mean kill it? Yes, she said without hesitation. It's not a creature, Elias. It's a machine, a drone piloted remotely. No life is lost. He paused, her words settling uneasily in his mind. He wasn't sure if he believed her, or if it even mattered. And how do we do that? Elara held up her hand, revealing a sleek, silver device no larger than a pen. This will disrupt its systems long enough to disable it. But you'll have to get close, within 10 meters. Elias's stomach churned. Me? You want me to? I cannot risk exposure, she interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. My energy reserves are still depleted. If they detect me, all is lost. He stared at the device, his mind racing. This was madness. He was a doctor, not some action hero. And yet, as he looked at Elara, he realized there was no alternative. If he didn't act, the Syndicate would find her, and him, and countless lives could be at stake. Fine, he said, snatching the disruptor from her hand. But you'd better have a backup plan. Elara's lips curved into a faint smile. Your survival is my priority, Elias. I will guide you. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers as Elias crept through the underbrush, the disruptor clenched tightly in his hand. Elara's voice came softly through the earpiece she had given him, her calm guidance a lifeline in the suffocating darkness. 30 meters to your left, she said. The drone's signal is strongest there. Elias adjusted his path, his heart hammering in his chest. Every rustle of leaves felt like a gunshot, every snap of a twig a death sentence. He had never felt so exposed, so utterly unprepared. Then he saw it, a sleek, spider-like machine crouched low to the ground, its limbs bristling with sensors. Its movements were disturbingly organic, like a predator sniffing out its prey. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. 10 meters, Elara's voice whispered. Careful. Careful, Elias thought bitterly. Easy for her to say. He took a slow, measured step forward. Then another, his body screaming at him to run. The drone's head swiveled, its glowing red eyes sweeping the area. Elias ducked behind a tree, his pulse thundering in his ears. You're close, Elara said. Now when it's distracted. Before she could finish, the drone emitted a sharp metallic screech, its limbs snapping into a combat stance. It had sensed him. Elias now. Elara's voice was urgent, cutting through his fear like a blade. He leaped from cover, the disruptor in his hand. The drone pivoted, its red eye locking onto him. But Elias didn't stop. He slammed the device against its chassis, triggering the disruptor. A burst of energy rippled through the machine, its limbs convulsing before it collapsed into a lifeless heap. Elias stumbled back, his chest heaving. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Elara's voice in his ear. You did it. He stared at the drone, a mixture of disbelief and adrenaline surging through him. That was way too close. You acted bravely, Elara said. But this is only the beginning. Elias looked up at the stars piercing through the forest canopy. Somewhere out there, more of them were coming. He didn't know if he could do this again, but one thing was clear. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A weapon forged in resolve. The night thickened around Elias as he dragged the lifeless drone back to the cabin, its metal limbs scraping against the ground. His mind raced with questions, each one heavier than the last. How many more of these things were coming? How long could he keep this up? His hands ached from gripping the disruptor, and the metallic tang of adrenaline still lingered in his mouth. The cabin door creaked as he pushed it open, the warmth of the room spilling over him like a balm. Elara was waiting, her glowing eyes scanning him with a mixture of relief and concern. You're uninjured, she noted, stepping closer. That is fortunate. Fortunate. Elias dropped the drone with a thud, his voice sharper than he intended. That thing nearly ripped me apart. I can't keep playing hero against machines like this. Alara crouched beside the drone, her delicate fingers gliding over its surface. You were resourceful, and your resolve is stronger than you realize. Elias collapsed into a chair, running a hand through his hair. Resolve doesn't mean much when they send a dozen of these things. She stood, her expression unreadable as she turned the drone over. A faint pulse of light flickered from its core, catching her attention. They won't send another scout. This one was equipped to relay my location. Its failure will delay them, but only for a short time. Great, Elias muttered, rubbing his temples. So what now? Alara straightened, her gaze steady. We prepare. If they breach this planet's atmosphere, your world will need more than courage to defend itself. You must create a weapon capable of outmatching their technology. Elias blinked at her, incredulous. You want me to build a weapon? With what? A screwdriver and some duct tape. Alara's lips twitched in the faintest hint of amusement. You underestimate your species' ingenuity. The materials we need are already here. And with my guidance, you will succeed. Her confidence felt misplaced, but Elias didn't argue. The alternative was unthinkable. Fine. What do we need? She knelt beside the drone again, prying open its metallic casing to reveal a network of shimmering circuits and strange, pulsating cores. This, she said, extracting a crystalline sphere no larger than a marble. It pulsed faintly, casting a soft glow across her iridescent skin. What is it? Elias asked, leaning forward. A power core, Alara explained. It harnesses energy far beyond anything your civilization has developed. With this, we can amplify your tools, create defenses, or something more. More. Elias echoed, the weight of her words settling on him. You're talking about a weapon that can take on an entire fleet. Precisely. She placed the core on the table, her kaleidoscopic eyes meeting his. But we must act quickly. The Syndicate does not waste time. Elias let out a slow breath, his mind racing. He wasn't an engineer or a soldier, but he had spent years in medical research. If he could save lives with nothing more than sterile gloves and a scalpel, maybe he could create something to protect them too. All right, he said, rising from his chair. Let's get to work. Hours turned into a blur of activity. Alara's knowledge of Syndicate technology, combined with Elias's practical ingenuity, made for an unlikely but effective partnership. They scavenged the drone's components, dismantling its intricate circuits and repurposing its core systems. The cabin transformed into a makeshift workshop, the air thick with the hum of machinery and the acrid smell of soldering metal. As they worked, Alara's energy seemed to return in small but noticeable ways. Her movements grew more fluid, her voice steadier. She explained the Syndicate's strategies in meticulous detail, her tone calm but urgent. Elias absorbed every word, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. What's the plan? He asked, glancing up from a circuit board. We build a disruptor, Alara said, her hands assembling a framework around the core. Not unlike the device you used earlier, but on a larger scale. Something that can incapacitate multiple drones, or even a ship. Elias frowned. Won't they just adapt to it? They might, she admitted, but adaptation takes time. And time is a weapon in itself. As dawn approached, the device began to take shape, a sleek, compact contraption brimming with raw potential. Alara tested its stability, her iridescent fingers working with surgical precision. The power core pulsed steadily within the framework, its light casting eerie patterns across the walls. It's done, she said finally, stepping back. Elias stared at the device, a mixture of pride and apprehension welling up inside him. And you're sure this will work? Alara nodded, her expression resolute. It will. But its effectiveness depends on you. Me? He asked, startled. Why me? Because you are human, she said simply. Your instincts, your creativity, they are unpredictable. The Syndicate cannot account for that. Her words struck a chord deep within him, igniting a spark of determination he hadn't felt in years. He nodded, gripping the device firmly. Then let's give them something they won't expect. The first test came sooner than expected. As the morning light filtered through the trees, the faint whir of approaching drones broke the fragile peace. Elara's head snapped up, her kaleidoscopic eyes narrowing. "They're here," she said, her voice sharp. Elias grabbed the disruptor, his pulse quickening. "How many?" "3," she replied. "Scouts, likely searching for their missing unit." His throat tightened, but he forced himself to focus. He followed Elara outside, the damp earth soft beneath his boots. The drones emerged from the treetops, their sleek forms glinting in the sunlight. "Now, Elias," Elara urged. He raised the disruptor, aiming it toward the oncoming machines. His hand trembled, but he steadied it, his finger hovering over the trigger. The device hummed to life, a low, resonant sound that grew into a crescendo. Then he fired. A burst of energy erupted from the disruptor, enveloping the drones in a shimmering wave. They convulsed midair, their lights flickering wildly before they crashed to the ground in unison. Silence followed, broken only by the faint crackle of the disrupted circuits. Elias lowered the device, his chest heaving. Elara stepped forward, her expression calm but her eyes shining with approval. "Well done," she said softly. He met her gaze, a flicker of hope stirring within him. For the first time, it felt like they had a chance, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The syndicate would not stop, and neither could they. The sky burned red. The morning air hung heavy with anticipation, the forest alive with sounds that felt sharper, more present than ever. Birds scattered from the treetops, their cries echoing like a warning. Elias stood at the cabin's edge, the disruptor slung over his shoulder. The 3 downed drones from the earlier skirmish lay in pieces nearby, their remnants already picked clean for usable parts. Inside, Elara was silent, her kaleidoscopic eyes fixed on the holographic display projected from her orb. The map now showed far more than scattered red blips. A concentrated cluster was forming, moving closer with deliberate intent. "They've stopped scouting," she said finally, her tone unreadable. "The main force is coming." Elias stepped inside, his pulse quickening. "How many?" Elara's gaze flicked toward him, the light from the projection casting eerie patterns across her iridescent skin. "Enough to flatten this forest." His stomach dropped. "And the disruptor? Can it handle that?" "It was never meant to hold back an army," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "But it can buy us time." Elias ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Time for what?" "Reinforcements. We're on our own, Elara." "No," she said firmly, standing to face him. "Time to think, to act. Your people's strength lies in improvisation. That is what they won't expect." He wanted to argue, to demand a better plan, but she was right. Every instinct told him that survival depended on quick thinking and risk. Swallowing his fear, he nodded. "Then let's make the most of it." The first wave arrived just before midday. The sky darkened as syndicate ships broke through the clouds, their sleek, angular forms casting ominous shadows over the forest. The largest hovered in place, its underbelly opening to release smaller crafts that glided toward the ground like metallic predators. Elias and Elara watched from the cabin, their faces lit by the faint glow of the disruptor. It was fully charged, the crystalline core humming softly within its casing. "Once they land, they'll spread out," Elara explained, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. "We need to disrupt their formation." Elias tightened his grip on the device. "And how do we do that?" Elara handed him a smaller sphere, its surface etched with glowing lines. "This will amplify the disruptor's range, but only briefly. You'll have to use it strategically." Elias stared at the sphere, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "What about you?" "I'll draw their attention," she said, retrieving another piece of scavenged tech from the drone remains. "If they focus on me, You'll have a clearer path. His heart sank at her words. That sounds a lot like a suicide mission. It's a calculated risk, she corrected, her tone resolute. And I have no intention of failing. Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. We stick together, he said finally. No heroics. Alara tilted her head, a faint smile crossing her lips. Human stubbornness. It may be your most enduring trait. The first skirmish was chaos. The Syndicate soldiers, tall, armored beings with elongated limbs and glowing visors, moved with unnerving precision. Their weapons emitted sharp bursts of energy that carved through trees like paper. Elias and Alara had taken cover behind a ridge, the disruptor's hum the only sound between the deafening blasts. Now, Alara shouted, gesturing toward the advancing soldiers. Elias activated the disruptor, the amplified sphere enhancing its reach. A wave of energy erupted from the device, rippling through the air and engulfing the soldiers. Their movements faltered, sparks erupting from their suits before they collapsed in unison. That worked, Elias muttered, exhaling a shaky breath. But his relief was short-lived. Above them, the Syndicate ship adjusted its position, its underside glowing ominously. They're recalibrating, Alara warned. They'll adapt quickly. Elias gritted his teeth. Then we hit them again before they can. He moved before fear could paralyze him, darting from cover to reposition the disruptor. The Syndicate soldiers were already recovering, their visors flickering back to life. Elias activated the device again. But this time, the wave of energy was weaker, barely enough to knock them off balance. They're adapting faster than I expected, Alara said, her voice tight with urgency. Elias cursed under his breath, his mind racing. Improvisation, she had said. That was their strength. He glanced at the debris-strewn battlefield, his eyes landing on one of the fallen drones. Alara, he called, an idea forming. Can you hack into their tech? Feed them false data. Her eyes widened with realization. It's risky. Their systems are highly encrypted. Can you do it or not? He pressed. She nodded, already moving toward the drone. Cover me. Elias turned his attention back to the advancing soldiers, his hands trembling as he aimed the disruptor. He fired again, the diminishing energy blast buying Alara precious seconds. The Syndicate forces pressed forward, their weapons cutting closer with every step. Hurry, he shouted, sweat dripping down his face. Almost there, Alara replied, her fingers dancing over the drone's interface. The device emitted a sharp whine before going silent. What did you do? Elias asked, his voice tight with fear. Alara stood, her expression grim. Redirected their targeting systems. The effect was immediate. The soldiers froze mid-step, their visors flickering wildly before they turned on each other. The air filled with the sound of energy blasts and metallic collisions as the Syndicate forces collapsed into disarray. Elias stared in disbelief. You actually did it. Alara's smile was faint but triumphant. For now. But they'll realize the deception soon enough. He nodded, the weight of the moment settling over him. The battle wasn't over, but they had bought themselves precious time. Time to regroup, to plan, and to fight again. As the last of the Syndicate soldiers fell, Elias looked toward the horizon, where the massive ship loomed like a vengeful god. This was just the beginning, and he knew the next wave would be even worse. But for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. We're not done yet, he said, his voice steady. No, Alara agreed, her eyes fixed on the sky. But neither are they. The heart of resistance. The air crackled with tension as Elias and Alara stood outside the cabin, their eyes fixed on the massive Syndicate ship hovering in the distance. Its ominous glow cast long, jagged shadows across the forest. The battle on the ground had been won, but the true challenge loomed overhead. The ship wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. The Syndicate wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to dominate. Elias gripped the disruptor tightly, his knuckles white. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was steady. He had no illusions about the odds. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and utterly unprepared for what was coming next. "Whatever you're planning," Elias said, his voice low, "it better be good." Alara's iridescent skin shimmered faintly in the twilight, her kaleidoscopic eyes narrowing with determination. "It's not a plan. It's a gamble." He raised an eyebrow. "A gamble." She turned to face him, her expression resolute. "The ship is the Syndicate's command center. If we disable it, the remaining forces will falter. But to do that, we'll need to breach its defenses." "And how do we do that?" Elias asked, gesturing toward the sky. "Throw rocks at it." Alara stepped closer, holding out a crystalline sphere she had modified from the earlier battle. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. "This is the key, a modified power core from their own technology. If we can get it inside their main reactor, it will create an energy cascade strong enough to disable the entire ship." Elias stared at the sphere, his stomach nodding. "And by get it inside, I'm guessing you mean me." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Your species has a knack for unexpected solutions." "Flattery won't make this any less insane," he muttered, but he took the sphere anyway, the cool surface humming against his palm. The journey to the Syndicate ship was surreal. Alara led him through the forest, her movements eerily graceful, almost blending with the shadows. Above them, the ship emitted a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the air, a constant reminder of its presence. As they approached, the ship's underside became more defined. Massive, alien in design, it pulsed with an otherworldly energy. A ramp extended to the ground, guarded by 2 sentries. Their towering forms were motionless, their visors scanning the area. "Stealth is our only option," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias swallowed hard. "What happens if they see us?" "They won't," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. With practiced precision, Alara activated a device on her wrist, bending the light around them in a shimmering veil. The sentries remained oblivious as they slipped past, their mechanical limbs twitching faintly in the silence. Elias's breath was shallow, every step feeling like a lifetime. Inside, the ship was even more imposing. The walls pulsed faintly, as if alive, and the air was thick with an unidentifiable charge. Alara led him through winding corridors, her movements deliberate and confident. They passed glowing panels covered in alien symbols, their meanings lost on Elias but clearly familiar to her. "This way," she said, gesturing toward a narrow passage. "The reactor is close." Elias hesitated, glancing back toward the entrance. "And once this thing detonates, it will disable the ship," Alara said, her voice steady. "But the blast radius will be significant." "So, we're running a suicide mission," Elias said flatly. "No," she replied, her eyes locking onto his. "We'll escape. Together." Her certainty was unnerving, but Elias didn't argue. There was no turning back now. The reactor room was a swirling vortex of light and energy, its core suspended in a massive chamber. The hum was deafening, a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through Elias's very bones. He stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it. Alara nudged him gently. "Focus. You only have one chance." He nodded, stepping forward with the modified power core clutched tightly in his hands. The reactor's surface was translucent, its interior swirling with chaotic energy. Every instinct pulled him to run, but he forced himself to press on. As he reached the edge, alarms blared, a sharp, piercing sound that made him flinch. The sentries had found them. "They're here," Elias shouted, glancing back at Alara. "Keep going," she yelled, turning to face the incoming soldiers. Her hands moved quickly, activating another device that sent a wave of energy crashing into the advancing Syndicate forces. "I'll hold them off." Elias turned back to the reactor, his heart hammering. He climbed onto the narrow ledge, balancing precariously as the reactor's energy surged around him. The heat was suffocating, the light blinding. With a final breath, he placed the modified core against the reactor surface. It adhered instantly, its glow intensifying. The room shuddered violently, the reactor's hum escalating into a deafening roar. Elias scrambled back, nearly losing his footing. "It's done," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Then run," Alara called, her tone sharp. The two of them sprinted through the corridors, the ship trembling violently as the reactor's energy spiraled out of control. The sentries pursued relentlessly, their weapons tearing through walls and ceilings as they closed the gap. Elias's lungs burned, his legs screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. As they neared the exit, the blast wave hit, a shockwave of pure energy that hurled them forward. They tumbled out of the ship, landing hard on the forest floor. Behind them, the Syndicate vessel erupted in a blinding cascade of light and sound, its massive form crumbling as the reactor's energy consumed it. Elias lay on the ground, gasping for air, his ears ringing. Beside him, Alara slowly sat up, her glowing eyes fixed on the burning wreckage. "We did it," she said softly, a note of disbelief in her voice. Elias turned to her, his face breaking into a weary smile. "We actually did it." The sky above them was clear now, the oppressive hum of the Syndicate ship replaced by the soothing sounds of the forest. But Elias knew the battle wasn't truly over. The Syndicate was vast, and this victory was only a small crack in their armor. Still, as he looked at Alara, her iridescent skin glowing faintly in the moonlight, he felt a spark of hope. Together, they had achieved the impossible, and together, they would face whatever came next.